Television Network.
ECOWAS delegation to meet Guinea's military junta on Friday. Somali Prime Minister Roble and President Farmajo disagree on cabinet reshuffle. And the presidents of China and the United States speak for the first time in months, discussing ways to avoid conflict. Hello and welcome. You're watching Africa Live. We're coming to live from Nairobi. I'm Hannah Viviers. Here are more stories making headlines this hour. In business, improved infrastructure and performance boost Tanzania's port revenue. And in your sports, Tunisia team receives heroes welcome at home after victory in the recently concluded 2021 FIBA AfroBasket competition. We begin this news hour on the unfolding situation in Guinea. Officials of the Economic Community of West African States, or ECOWAS, are on Friday meeting with the special military forces responsible for overthrowing Alpha Conde's government. The ECOWAS delegation is led by Burkina Faso's Foreign Minister Alpha Barry, accompanied by foreign ministers from Ghana, Nigeria, and Togo. It's been reported that the ECOWAS meeting with Mamadou Doumbouya's military junta aims at securing the release of Conde, the return of constitutional order to Guinea, as well as understanding the reasons behind the coup. With more on that meeting, here's CGTN's Desiree Cannon.
West Africa Economic Bloc ECOWAS suspended Guinea on Wednesday after the military coup will arrive in Conakry this Friday. According to some sources, ECOWAS is coming to Conakry to negotiate the release of the deposed President Alpha Conde, listen to the junta, and know more about the coup d'etat. ECOWAS is coming to Guinea to inquire about the state of health of Alpha Conde, to meet him with the agreement of the junta, to know the conditions in which he lives, and to find out what the junta really needs to do with him. The question now is whether the coup leaders will put Alpha Conde under house arrest or will he be forcibly exiled. ECOWAS will also involve the country's political parties and civil society in their discussion with the junta on how to put in place the transition structures, which means form a new government and the transitional council, which will play the role of a parliament. Speaking of the transition calendar, ECOWAS does not want it to last 18 months as desired by the junta. The result of today's meeting will tell us more about the future of Guinea. Desiree Cannon, CGTN, Conakry, Guinea.
Meanwhile, Doumbouya's military junta says Alpha Conde's mismanagement of the country triggered the takeover, and it has ordered Guinea's central bank to freeze all government accounts.
It is business as usual here in Conakry, Guinea's capital. The recent coup that saw President Alpha Conde removed from power on Sunday seems to have some support. Kafala Mara says the turn of events in his hometown is a breakthrough for him and his countrymen, as it promises better days ahead.
It is good for me because we have been praying that Alpha Conde would leave power. God has answered these prayers. In Africa, all the leaders are after money. They don't care about the people. So there is no respect, no control. Even between a father and a mother, there's always a problem. So we have been praying for Alpha Conde to leave power. And he has left. If people fight because of money, there's always a problem.
Former President Alpha Conde was detained on Sunday and driven out of the presidential palace. The coup was led by the head of Special Forces, Colonel Mamadou Doumbouya.
We never thought this man would be president of this country. It never crossed our minds. It happened suddenly that he came to power while we were sleeping. We weren't thinking somebody would deliver us from these problems, and we are praying that God directs him. Let God give him power and the strength so that he can deliver us from our difficulties that we have encountered in the hands of the previous government.
Guinea is ranked among the poorest countries in the world. The United Nations says half of the Guinean population lives in poverty. This despite the West African nation having huge deposits of minerals like iron ore, bauxite, gold, diamond and many more. Conde is blamed for mismanaging the country and leading his people into abject poverty since he took power in 2010. He was the first ever democratically elected president since the end of French colonial rule in 1958. The constitutional amendment that allowed him to pursue a third term triggered tension in Guinea, including dozens of killings last year ahead of the elections. Guineans are now hoping that Colonel Dambuya's regime will lead the mineral-rich republic to improved prosperity.
Our hopes are with this new president. We are praying that God directs him. Our husbands and children are not working, so we are really praying that God will give him the strength to do all that the last president failed to do. When you give birth, you are hoping that at your old age, your child will be able to take care of you, and we hope that this comes to pass.
Top officials of the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, are now urging Dambuya to return the country to constitutional rule. They are also calling for a release of Alpha Conde, whose whereabouts are still unknown. ECOWAS had earlier removed Guinea's membership from the bloc and threatened to impose sanctions on coup leaders following Sunday's events. The outcome of the meeting on Friday will determine if the military government will make way for the rule of law. Wanjamungai, CGTN.
We move on to other top stories on the continent. Let's head over to South Africa now, which is set to take part in Sinovac's global study. The Chinese vaccine manufacturer is looking to test its COVID-19 vaccine on children and adolescents. Kenya will also be taking part in the study, along with Chile and the Philippines and Malaysia. South Africa is to begin its part of the trial on Friday. The country's vaccination drive is for individuals who are over 18 and currently does not include children or adolescents. Where CGTN's Angela Coppola is in Johannesburg, South Africa for us, and he joins us now. Angela, thank you so much for being with us on the program. What more can you tell us, Angelo, about the trial of Sinovac vaccine on children and adolescents in the country?
Well, I'm being told that the study has public health importance globally because that vaccine prevents COVID-19 and transmission in pediatrics, which are those the people we're talking about, those 6 month to 17-year-olds. And it's a crucial tool to assist in curbing the pandemic. Although children and adolescents have milder forms of the disease than adults, they do remain susceptible to the infection and severe manifestations across all ages. Importantly, the trial does receive South African Health Products Regulatory Authority approvals, and it's also listed in the South African Clinical Trial Registry. So it's got all the approvals in place for that trial to begin today. Hannah?
Angela, other than that approval from regulatory bodies, how are the public responding to this?
Well, the public, as you know, the test started today, so it's still early days. But what we do understand is that we've seen some vaccine hesitancy developing amongst the 18 years and plus groups up to the 80-year-olds. So we know that there's some vaccine hesitancy there. We know that the authorities are trying to deal with it by providing more information and to reinforce the fact that it's important that the shot gets taken, or the 2 shots if you're going for Pfizer. But what's unclear is how parents of adolescents are going to react when their adolescents turn around and say to them they don't want to have the vaccine. So there's probably going to be some disputes in households around that, because we do know that there are some adolescents who are not too keen, and in fact there's some 18-year-olds who also are not too keen to get vaccinated. So it's still early days, but let's hope that the South African public do react positively in this regard.
Angela, what more can you tell us about the first child who is to be vaccinated?
Well, look, they received their first shot at the Sefako Makgatho Health Sciences University in Tshwane, that's Pretoria, a little over an hour ago. The child will receive a second shot in 28 days' time, and that's in line with the researchers' protocols in terms of the trial. The child could get the vaccine, or it could get a placebo. We don't know. What we do know, though, is that the South African arm of this trial will include 2,000 children and adolescents at 7 sites across the country. They're all part of that group of 14,000 that you mentioned from those other 4 countries, including, of course, Kenya. So as it stands right now, we have to wait to see for how long the trial is actually going to last and when they start measuring and monitoring the impacts of either the placebo or the vaccine on those youngsters from as young as 6 months old all the way to 17, Hannah.
Thank you so much for all that, Angela. CGTN's Angela Coppola speaking to us from Johannesburg, South Africa. Well, we're staying in South Africa, and the country has lost more parents and primary caregivers to COVID-19 than any other country in the world. It's one of the countries hardest hit by the HIV and AIDS pandemic, which left 14 million children around the world without one or both of their parents. Many of these children then ended up with caregivers. But COVID-19 has sparked a new crisis, and the number of orphans is expected to rise. CGTN's Julie Shire brings us that story.
The coronavirus pandemic has dealt a devastating blow to children and orphans. According to a research by a health consortium, including the World Bank and South Africa's Cape Town University, a parent or caregiver dies every 12 seconds from COVID-19. 1.5 million children worldwide are left behind and in anguish.
The parent gets extremely ill and is rushed off to hospital, and the child is not allowed to go and visit them in hospital, and they don't see them. And then they're told that the parent has died. And then there's this whole funeral process that happens, which is a drive-by, and they don't even get to see them and say goodbye for one final time.
Childcare organizations in South Africa have had their hands full. CF Mbili Orphanage in Cape Town has a rising number of children arriving on its doorstep.
We were feeding around about 30 to 40 kids in a week within our soup kitchen. But I'm telling you now, we are around about 150, and that's only new kids. Those are not kids that we had on our list.
South Africa was already dealing with a trail of child-headed households left by the HIV epidemic. But the sting of COVID-19 has been far greater.
HIV was a bit not vicious like COVID, because when it was HIV actually took longer to actually attack patients or their immune system. When COVID hit, Gogo was the primary caregiver, and now she suddenly dies. And then you see within these child-headed households, it's not only 2 kids. The Gogo was looking after maybe 3 set of grandchildren. So there might be 9.
Social workers are left picking up the pieces.
Sometimes you notice that when we touch a nerve, instead of them being able to receive that positively, it actually causes an aggression. So I think there is a sense of post-traumatic stress that's going on with the kids.
There is concern youngsters could be left vulnerable to domestic violence, financial abuse, and child trafficking, or become criminals themselves.
The risk is that children will turn to crime. They would start off in a petty way. They would get involved in gangs. They could do all of those things just to get a feel of belonging. Because if they have no family around and the only sense they get of belonging is to belong to a gang.
South Africa has recorded one of the highest numbers in the world for primary caregiver deaths due to COVID-19. This tragic circumstance has been described as a hidden pandemic and is expected to have long-lasting and damaging implications. Julie Shara, CGTN, Cape Town, South Africa.
Well, on to East Africa now. In Somalia, the Horn of Africa, some opposition leaders have criticized President Mohamed Abdullahi, popularly known as Farmajo, for recently reshuffling top security officials. The reshuffle is seen as interference into investigations into the disappearance of cybersecurity spy Ikran Tahlil Farah. Prime Minister Hussein Roble had earlier suspended the head of the National Intelligence and Security Agency, Fahad Fassan, for failure to properly investigate the spy's death. The differences between the leaders could slow down ongoing political processes in the Horn of Africa nation. Authorities say the wrangle between the Prime Minister and the President threatens the work of the government as well as preparations for elections and the fight against terror group Al-Shabaab. Leaders of the opposition have, in a statement, backed Prime Minister Roble. Well, for more on that story, we're joined by CGTN's Michael Baleke in Kampala, Uganda, Ali Hussein Sahal, a local journalist based in Mogadishu, and Dr. Hassan Sheikh. Ali, a lecturer at the Somali National University. He's also in Mogadishu. Thank you so much to all of you for joining us on the program. Ali Hussein, let's begin with you. What is the latest on this rift between the president and the prime minister? I seem to not have Hussein there with us. Let's go over to Uganda, where Baleke is standing by for us. Baleke, Uganda threatening to withdraw its support to the African Union peacekeeping mission in Somalia. How big a setback would this be for the country?
Hi there. The threat by Uganda to withdraw from Somalia, I think, has been widely reported in the media, quoting President Museveni, but I think it was quoted out of context. Mr. Museveni was trying to support the move by the U.S. government to pull out of Afghanistan, and he says every country is sovereign and should fight its own internal wars without necessarily outside interference. And in the same spirit, President Museveni, he said Uganda will at one time exit Somalia, and if that time is right, meaning that if Somalia troops are ready to take over and fight the external aggression on their own, that way Uganda can move out. But also he said that there is still no unity among the current leadership there in Somalia, and that the warring groups need to come together and agree on the way forward, so that they can be able to unify and have a unifying force to fight off any threats. Yes, we already know that there are plans to reduce the AMISOM numbers in Somalia, to reduce them and replace them with police units, while the Somalian security forces shoulder and take on the work of combating terrorism. But Uganda, it's still early to say that Uganda is pulling out.
Ali Hussein, let's bring you in here. Tell us about the latest on the rift between the president and the prime minister.
Who are you asking? Are you going to ask me or somebody ask the police?
Ali Hussein, it's Hannah. I'm asking you about that rift.
Yeah. I can hear you. Yeah, sorry. Sorry, I can hear you. The latest between President Farmajo and Prime Minister's differences was a statement issued by the Speaker of Parliament, Mohamed Mursal, who opposed the swearing-in of the newly appointed Security Minister Abdullahi Noor by Prime Minister Roble. Mursal accused Roble of not following the due process. Roble, in a brief ceremony held at the Ministry of Security, swore in the newly appointed Security Minister Abdullahi Noor. And the swearing-in was attended by people within the ministry, and it was conducted by the Minister of Justice in Somalia. The Speaker deferred to the process, saying that it was not the legal procedure. He said that the newly appointed official was supposed to be presented in front of the Parliament if the session is open. And if the session is not open, there is a permanent committee in the lower house that the Prime Minister was able to present to his newly elected minister. So that has further widened the rift between leaders, top leaders in this country. As you know, the appointment of the new minister was earlier rejected by Muhammad Abdullahi Farmajo, the president of this country, calling it unconstitutional, saying that this is not the right time to appoint officials, or appointment should not come at this time from the Prime Minister. And this has actually this was forced by the First of all, the former security minister is believed to be a close ally to President Farmajo. He was seen to support President Farmajo's politics and policies and way of rule of the country, and that could be one reason why.
I'm going to come back to you.
Prime Minister
I'm going to come back to you in a moment, Dr. Hassan Sheikh. I'm going to bring you in here. What is your take on all of this and what's happening in Somalia?
Actually, what's going on in Somalia, there is a multiple crisis, and then one of the most important factor is the constitutional problem of constitutional crisis in Somalia, because the parliament and the presidentialist term in office ended, and then the former president Muhammad Abdullahi Farmajo failed to organize or to hold on any meaningful election by the indirect election or direct election. And lastly, as a form of compromise, the regional states and the federal government agreed the former president to transfer the power of security apparatus and the election process to the premier. So the premier started reorganizing the national political actors and stakeholders. Once he was moving forward, then the president interrupted because he wanted to still to control the security institutions as well the electoral process. In addition, there was someone who's the president's ally, the former chief of intelligence, Fahad Yassin, was suspended by the premier because there is a suspicion of the killing of one of the agency's employees, Ikram. But the president rejected that move, the premier, to assess the intelligence agents. So because there's the things are getting worse and worse until it seems the things looks like the out of hand. And now the president is paralyzing himself, and again he's paralyzing again the government or the premier's office. So
Dr.
the whole system is collapsed.
Dr.
And the
Sanchez,
risk
Dr.
is very high.
Dr. Sanchez, thank you so much for that input. CGTN's Michael Baleke, who was speaking to us from Kampala, Ali Hussein Sahal, a local journalist who's based in Mogadishu, and Dr. Hassan Sheikh Ali, who is a lecturer at Somali National University. Thank you to all of you for joining us on the program. Well, let's move on to other news that's making headlines. Recently, the U.S. intelligence agency concocted the so-called traceability investigation report. Ethiopian Prosperity Party's head of public and international relations, Bikila Hurisa, said in an interview that the traceability issue should never be politicized. Hurisa stated that actions that politicize such matters must be stopped.
One of the serious problems in the world emerging these days is politicization of everything. That should stop. Science should be left to science. Politics should be left to politics. And I strongly believe that origin tracing of COVID-19 should be left to neutral, independent, professional researchers. I don't think that origin tracing is about intelligence issue.
Let's not turn to the ongoing conflict in northern Ethiopia. The government says it has pushed TPLF forces out of the Afar region. The TPLF, however, is refuting these claims. It says its troops have simply redeployed to neighboring Amhara region. The back and forth comes after officials accuse the TPLF of killing dozens of civilians in Amhara. Asatal has that story.
Since November, the Ethiopian government has been fighting TPLF forces. The conflict, which initially started in Tigray, spread to Amhara and Afar. Now the Ethiopian government claims it has pushed back TPLF forces from the Afar region. They also accuse the forces of killing civilians.
The federal government strongly denounces in the strongest terms these targeted killings. While the numbers so far that I have is that an estimated 200 innocent civilians have been targeted, a committee has been established to investigate exactly how many individuals have been killed on the ground, and so these figures may change.
The TPLF has, however, pushed back against both claims. It claims it strategically withdrew troops from the Afar region to focus on fighting in Amhara. In a statement, it also refuted allegations made by the government of mass killings. Ethiopia's government, however, continues to state that the TPLF troops did not withdraw.
TPLF's claims of having withdrawn from the Afar region, and I put it quote unquote, that is not true. They have been routed.
The months-long fighting has forced over 2 million people to flee their homes. Ethiopian government security forces have also faced accusations of carrying out massacres and extrajudicial killings. Meanwhile, aid organizations like the UN have warned of a looming famine in the northern region as fighting continues. Astatal, CGTN.
In a meeting of the leaders of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa met virtually for the BRICS summit, they touched on climate change and the turmoil in Afghanistan. Chinese President Xi Jinping announced 100 million doses of COVID-19 vaccines to be donated to developing countries. CGTN's Wang Suen has more.
Cooperation for over 15 years. The 13th BRICS summit was held in a virtual format for the second time due to the coronavirus pandemic. India hosted this year's summit and focused on BRICS cooperation for continuity, consolidation, and consensus. Saying the 5 countries have forged ahead on a common journey of development, Chinese President Xi Jinping pointed out the BRICS nations have become an important force.
Over the past 15 years, our 5 countries have enhanced strategic communication and political trust in the spirit of openness, inclusiveness, and equality, respected each other's social system and development path, and explored a sound way for countries to interact with each other.
Xi made 5 proposals for BRICS practical cooperation on public health, vaccines, economy, political and security, and people-to-people exchanges.
Facing the COVID-19 pandemic, global uncertainties, international and regional health issues, global economic recovery is at a crucial moment. Chinese President Xi Jinping attends the summit and delivers a speech calling building of a community with a shared future for mankind, painting the blueprint for BRICS cooperation, leading the global cooperation of fighting COVID-19, pointing direction for global economic recovery. It has showed China's openness and inclusiveness and the idea of mutual benefit, pointing out the direction for BRICS cooperation.
While addressing the summit, Xi announced that China will donate 100 million more doses of COVID-19 vaccines to developing countries by the end of 2021, along with a donation of $100 million to COVAX. She also called for more international cooperation on vaccines. This year marks 15th anniversary of BRICS Summit. Countries promise to work closer together to fight COVID and to bring about global economic recovery. Next year, China will host the BRICS Summit for the second time, so there will be a lot of expectations from here. Wang Siwen, CGTN.
During the meeting, Chinese President Xi Jinping offered 5 proposals to boost cooperation among BRICS countries. He highlighted public health, encouraging more joint research and mutual recognition of standards. Secondly, he called for vaccines to be accessible to all and emphasized China's work in boosting the global supply. The third point was on the economy. Xi stressed areas for more cooperation such as trade and investment, technology, and green development. Fourth was about strengthening political and security ties. Xi urged implementation of the bloc's counter-terrorism plan. And finally, he called for more people-to-people exchanges, suggesting building a platform for vocational education. Let's now take a short break and return. More news making headlines, including Tunisian president plans to change political system and suspend constitution. And Nigeria's President Buhari visits southeast region amid rising separatist tensions.
Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climates and enchanting geography, and a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. we are at the heart of the continent to bring you the untold stories.
Let's have a look.
We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
Tunis,
Syria,
Juba,
Johannesburg,
Ethiopia, Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back. You're watching News Making Headlines right here on Africa Live. Well, the presidents of China and the United States have spoken for the first time in 7 months. Friday's 90-minute phone call discussed a range of issues from COVID-19 to climate change to strained ties, with both leaders agreeing on the need for relations to get back on track. Sui Huawa has more.
This phone call is very significant as it has ended a nearly 7-month gap in direct communications between the two leaders. Now remember, their first phone call was made on Chinese New Year's Eve, and that was a month after U.S. President Joe Biden was sworn in, and many saw that call as a tone setter for bilateral relations. Now with this one, the two sides exchanged the views on bilateral relations and some major issues. President Xi first expressed his condolences to Biden and the American people in regards to casualties and property loss caused by Hurricane Ida. And President Xi also pointed out that for some time, the U.S. policy toward China has caused serious difficulties in bilateral relations, which is not in the fundamental interest of the two peoples and the common interest of all countries in the world. Now, whether China and the U.S. can properly handle their relations has a bearing on the future and destiny of the world. And he said China-U.S. relations are not a multiple choice question of whether to do well, but a must-answer question of how to do well. And on that note, Biden agreed and said China-U.S. relations are the most important bilateral relations in the world, and there's no reason for the two countries to fall into conflict because of competition. And President Xi also expounded China's position on issues such as climate change and said that China adheres to the priority of ecological protection as well as a green and low carbon development path. And he said the two countries should continue exchange and dialogue in areas like epidemic prevention, economic recovery, and other areas, as long as it is on the basis of respecting each other's core interests and properly managing differences. Now, both sides agreed to continue to maintain regular contact and create conditions to move bilateral relations forward.
Well, the UN is warning that 97% of Afghans could fall below the poverty line unless the country's economic and political crises are addressed. We'll discuss this with the Associated Press's Kathy Gannon, who's in Kabul.
One of the people at the airport yesterday was Zabiullah Mujahid, who is the Deputy Information Minister, and he said Afghanistan is desperate. It needs to have this international assistance. Regardless of what the international community might think of the Taliban's new cabinet, the leadership, people are desperate. I mean, even before the Taliban takeover on August 15th, the poverty level in Afghanistan was nearly 60%. That means that 60% of the population was living on less than $2 a day. The mass evacuation as well has removed a lot of health workers, educationists, young people who were actually doing work in the communities. So there's a real desperate need among ordinary Afghans, and the emergency flights are starting to ramp up, but as Deborah Lyon said quite accurately, is that the need is tremendous. Also, just to run the country, to start the ministries again, to start the government again. People have been asked to come to work, but I was talking to somebody at the airport yesterday, and he said, you know, I'm here, and he had been 10 years working at the airport. He said, but I'm not getting paid. So, you know, there has to be salaries paid. There has to be just the simple things like paper and pens and to get the passport office up and running. So the need is really quite tremendous. And the banks, you know, people are lined up 2 and 3 deep, hundreds waiting for the bank to open, to get a little bit of money, to get the money that they've had in their bank accounts. For some of them, it's their life savings. So yes, the need is quite enormous.
We turn our attention now to North Africa, where in Tunisia, the president there is being reported to be planning to suspend the country's constitution. This is according to one of his advisors who spoke with the Reuters news agency. He said that President Sayed may also launch a referendum to amend the political system. Over 6 weeks ago, the Tunisian president seized a wide range of governing powers. He's yet to declare his long-term plans for the country, but has pushed back against claims that he staged a coup. In the meantime, Sayed continues to face international and domestic pressure to form a new government. Well, for more on that, we're joined by Sami Hamdi, the managing director of the International Interest in Global Risk and Intelligence company, which is based in London. Thank you so much for joining us, Sami. The Tunisian president planning to suspend the constitution, that's what's being reported. And also it's being reported that he plans to amend the political system. What are your thoughts on this?
I think it's something that the president has made clear from day one. He's always said that the constitution, his phrase was "Akalahu al-himar," the donkey has eaten it, and that it's inconducive to Tunisia and the challenges that Tunisia is supposed to face. However, he's been hesitant to officially announce the suspension of the constitution because of the international reaction to his coup that he has embarked on. He's seen 2 visits by U.S. delegations, both of them asserting a return to parliamentary democracy using this specific phrase. There was the G7 joint statement that was released last week in which, or a few days ago, in which it called on President Said to return to a constitutional order, implying that where he is now is not a constitutional order that is operating in a vacuum. And Ayaf bin Ashur, one of the most prominent constitutional experts in the country and the one who wrote the election law in 2011, came out and stated that Said and the army are now operating outside of the law, outside of a legal framework. Said's intention has always been clear. He wants a presidency, he wants a presidential system, one in which the president has the executive powers, not like the current system where the prime minister and parliament are supreme and they have the executive powers. And the people who are upset, or rather angry at the lack of the realization of the aspirations of the Arab Spring, the increased unemployment, the increased poverty, the increased lack of opportunity, are going along with Qais Said, not necessarily because they support the idea of changing the political system or changing the governing system, but more lashing out at the political parties and the political elite who have failed the Tunisian people over the past 10 years and who voted for Qais Said, not necessarily because they supported Said, but because that vote was a protest vote against that political elite. So there are a number of dynamics at play, but it's clear that Said's intention was clear from 2019. It was no secret. The coup was being touted 6 months before it even happened, and Said appears now to be moving forward, and it appears whatever international pressure is being applied doesn't seem to be sufficient enough for Said to decide to reverse course.
And Sami, if he is successful in implementing this plan that you've mentioned some of what you think it might entail, do you think that it would work to improve the situation in Tunisia?
The reality is that Ben Ali, the dictator who was overthrown after 25 years in power by the Arab Spring, had full presidential powers. Bourguiba before him ruled for his whole lifetime after the independence, and he had full executive powers, full presidential powers. Dictatorship or centralization of power did not deliver the prosperity or development that the people are asking for. So the problem is not the system in and of itself. Secondly, Qais Said has not even tried to work with the parliament. The constitution gives him the ability to present a mubadara tashri'iyya, which is a priority of law. He's able to present law to parliament, and parliament must give it priority at all times. Said has not presented a single law to parliament. He's not tried to work with this parliament either to work within the constitution. So the reality is that when you look at the fact that we had presidential dictatorship and we had parliament, the reality is that it's not the actual system itself that is preventing the development. Moreover, when you look at the electoral tendencies in Tunisia, in 2011 they voted the Nahda on the basis that they were God-fearing people, not on the basis of a political program. In 2014 they voted Nida Tunis to spite Al-Nahda, not because Beji Qaid al-Sibsi, the president who won, had any political program. In 2019 They voted Said to spite everybody, and Said publicly said, I have no political program. In other words, even the people themselves, when they are voting, they are not voting on the basis of anybody who might present a development plan, but more voting on the basis of how they feel and the tendencies or the general trends that are taking place in the region. So the issue is not the system, the issue is the practice and the implementation of democracy by the political elite and the people themselves. So when you're handing the state today to Qais Said and saying, Said, fix everything for us, and the reality is that since he took power, the price of potatoes going up, tomatoes going up, basic goods are going up, medicine is going up. The reality is it's getting much worse as a result of the uncertainty. The reality is that the reconcentration of power in the hands of one person is not the solution. Moreover, the point that I really want to make is this: the greatest achievement of the Arab Spring was not necessarily that it promised development or the like. That requires time and development and consensus and dialogue and the like, but rather the unique ability in the Arab world to transition power peacefully, to be able to go to an election and vote for somebody else if that person has failed. As Morocco has demonstrated, the Islamists can be crushingly defeated in elections. The question here is, why didn't Said go to the people in parliamentary elections and say to them, I want to change the constitution, come and vote for me? Why was there a need for this coup? And the reality is, it's because the people are divided on the way forward. They're not sure what's the best way to go forward. So the direct answer to your question is this: it doesn't promise development, it doesn't promise prosperity, it doesn't guarantee that there will be any improvement in the lives of the people. What it does guarantee, however, is the end of the democratic transition, the end of peaceful transition of power, and the return to the struggle and the human rights abuses and the like that we're already seeing take place in Tunisia. We're seeing civilians being tried in military courts. We're seeing MPs being arrested on trumped-up charges. We're seeing the lack of a fair trial taking place. In other words, we're seeing a regression of all of the gains that were made in the Arab Spring simply to spite a political elite that were voted in by the people, whereas the people could have simply gone to the next election and voted for a different party, a different political program that might actually represent some sort of prosperity and development that they're looking for. So the short answer to your question, even though I gave a long answer, the short answer to your question is no, it doesn't guarantee development, prosperity, on the like. And in fact, if history is a lesson for any of us, history demonstrates that the centralization of power in the hands of a dictator or in the hands of one person rarely brings about the development that the people want.
Sami, thank you for your long answer. It's given us so much detail and given us so much in terms of just understanding a little bit better about what's happening in that country. Sami Hamid, the managing director of the International Interest, a global risk and intelligence company which is based in London. Well, let's turn to Nigeria now, where President Muhammadu Buhari has visited the country's southeast. This comes as the region has been hit by rising insecurity there. Over 100 police officers have been killed in the region this year. Asatal has more on the Nigerian president's visit.
The Nigerian president's visit comes as the southeastern region tackles separatist tensions and a rise on attacks on police. Buhari arrived in Imo State to inspect construction projects as well as hold meetings with local leaders.
I have gone through the same problem at the center to make sure that infrastructure is what will enable the people to mind their own businesses. If there are no roads, if there is no security, what can people do?
Security is a growing concern in the region, as is the rise of separatist ambitions. 2 months ago, Nnamdi Kanu, the leader of the indigenous people of Biafra, was arrested after being extradited from Kenya. The group called for residents to stay at home and close shops to protest against Buhari's visit.
Security is number one thing, and we'll try and do that. When security, then the economy. When people feel secure, then they mind their own businesses.
Buhari continues to face several security challenges. Beyond tensions in the southeast, the north is battling a rise in kidnappings and attacks by bandits. Astatal, CGTN.
Your business news is coming up after the break. Here's what you can expect. Improved infrastructure and performance boost Tanzania's port revenue. And South Africa's agriculture sector records improved tractor sales in August.
taken me completely out of my depth, but at the same time, it's exciting. It's new, it's different, it's a challenge.
It's really exciting.
Well, let's not take a look at what's happening in the world of finance. Business at Tanzania's ports is booming despite the disruptions to trade brought by the COVID-19 pandemic. The increased revenues are a result of improved infrastructure and performance at the Dar es Salaam and Mtwara ports. CGTN's Isaac Lukando gives us the details.
Tanzania's ports are performing well despite the COVID-19 pandemic. In the last 6 months, the country's ports handled 1 million more tons of cargo than it did in the same period last year, bringing in some $229 million. Eric Hamisi, the man tasked with overseeing Tanzania's ports, says not going into COVID lockdowns, improving infrastructure and overall efficiency is yielding double-digit growth in revenues.
If you look at July 2020, and July 2021, that is almost 23% increase of throughput. So we are doing well, and August this year is going to be even better.
Deepening of berths at the port of Dar es Salaam has enabled larger ships and volumes of cargo to come through. Players in the shipping industry say improvements at the port of Dar es Salaam have raised their business prospects.
We used to bring ships here and they wait 1 to 4 days out anchorage waiting for berth. Now, almost ship is coming and berthing directly on average. If there is a delay, it will be in hours, not in days like it was in the past.
Before the improvements, the World Bank estimated that shipping companies would lose around $252 million annually due to anchorage costs as a result of long delays. The bank believes that with improved efficiency, Tanzania's ports stand to contribute an additional 7% to the country's GDP.
The port of Dar es Salaam is currently the largest of several ports in Tanzania, handling 95% of the country's international trade. An increase in the volume of cargo that passes through here not only benefits the country's economy, but also the 8 landlocked countries served by it.
17 million tons of cargo passed through the port of Dar es Salaam last year, and only 5 million of them were transit cargo going to neighboring countries. Authorities say there is room for improvement.
We want to see the number going up, because that is, if you work out numbers, that is only 30% transit cargo. So this port is not for Dar es Salaam only, it's not for Tanzania only. This port is for the region.
The Tanzania Ports Authority says $100 million is being invested in new equipment to further improve the capacity of ports in the country. It hopes this will help the country become the #1 port in Africa within the next 10 years. Isaac Lukando, CGTN, Dar es Salaam.
Well, South Africa's agri-sector is reporting a solid production and harvesting season. August tractor sales of 724 units were almost 56% higher than the 465 units sold in August of last year. CGTN's Angela Coppola reports.
Not only are tractor sales up, 14 combine harvesters were sold in August. And on a year-to-date basis, combine harvester sales are now 25% up on last year. And that's due to the good crop yields.
South Africa is having one of the fantastic seasons in 2020-21 production season. Because now, I mean, that's like the second largest on record, around about just over 16 million tons.
Farmers in the summer cropping areas have just had a good harvesting season, had a good production season. It's not quite a record maize crop, but it's one of the highest maize crops ever. The soybean crop, which is the second biggest crop, is the highest crop ever. And overall, commodity prices have been good. So the farmers' net income has been good.
That net income growth has led to many farmers replacing their machinery.
The tractor sales is one of the important indicators, have been growing by double digits in South Africa since about mid-2020 coming into this year.
It's important to have good equipment because a lot of the processes in agriculture are timeless. So they've taken the opportunity to replace equipment, not just tractors, but combine harvesters as well.
Tractors and combine harvesters make up 75% of the monetary value of the new agricultural machinery market, which is estimated at $715 million, and most of it is imported.
The prices have improved because of the stronger rand, but it's still a very, very competitive market. So everybody sharpens their pencils very, very carefully in accordance with what the rand value at which they brought in the machine was and is likely to be.
The agricultural sector had a good season. Confidence is high, harvests are up, commodity prices have improved, and exports are solid with a $1.5 million agricultural trade surplus. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
It's time now for the latest in sports. Tunisia's basketball team received a hero's welcome after touching down in Tunis following their successful defense of their FIBA AfroBasket title in Rwanda on Sunday. Here's CGTN's Adnan Chiwashi with more.
The national squad was led by experienced domestic players like Radwan Slimane. At 41, he played his 8th and final AfroBasket and won his 3rd Continental title. Teammate Akram Berromdan was the tournament most valuable player. For Slimane, winning in Rwanda was the perfect send-off to his decorated career.
I'm happy to have won a 3rd African title in my last match with the national squad. I joined the team 20 years ago. I'm very proud of this generation of players.
Tunisia is given a positive image. We dominated all games and won all the matches. It was a difficult tournament. I'm the AfroBasket MVP thanks to the support of all my teammates, the technical staff and fans.
Two exceptional international players, Salah Mejri and Michael Roll, joined the team and made many sacrifices to win the gold medal in Kigali.
This is my last AfroBasket and my last participation with the national team. I came back from the NBA with one objective, winning the African title. I gave my best and I played to win.
The Tunisian Basketball Federation and the Ministry of Youth and Sports have supported the team to train locally and abroad. Preparations for the 2021 AfroBasket lasted more than 4 months.
Our players made a great preparation over 120 days in 2021. I thank the technical staff. Our objective was the podium. The team was rejuvenated by 40%. And we all succeeded in this great challenge.